I won't call it a bad trip. It wasn't a bad trip. It was very challenging. It was difficult. It was dark. So I want people to understand, and I want people to know that there's no shame, that you can heal through this process. So my life before my very meaningful psychedelic journey I was leading up to the pandemic with about 6 years of pretty deep depression. There were some deep hurts, and there was intense brain fog. There was lack of interest in life. There was, and because I was gatekeeping it, I thought that there was, like, how could I be depressed? Like, I don't have the kind of trauma that a lot of people have experienced, so I shouldn't take up a therapist time. I have a job. My family is well. I've got a good marriage. All of these things that I was telling myself. In addition, my mom had been on the verge of death multiple times. She's this multiple stroke victim. So depression, mourning the loss of my mother and my grandmother also, by the way. My grandmother had passed, and I was very close to her. I had been working professionally as a director in HR. There was intense burnout that I experienced during the pandemic around the time that I had this journey. My challenge at the time was recognizing how my brain had been wired, and the constructs created and the way that I was raised had conditioned me in a certain way. How do I change that mindset? How do I rewire those things that I had been taught for so long? So I started getting curious about that and what I could do to help change that and to heal. The experience I'm going to talk about was a journey with LSD and MDMA about 2 years ago. I mean, I was raised just like many of us were, not only in an intensely Christian, conservative upbringing, evangelical, Pentecostal, non-denominational upbringing that I was in, but the war on drugs and this is your brain on drugs. So normally I would be extremely fearful going into an experience like this. But I had friends who were sharing their stories, and I had been experiencing, all of this, the brain studying that I was doing. And the group that I was with, is so nice because I felt so safe. I was with a doctor, I was with a paramedic, I was with a bioengineer, with scientists, like, that could explain to me what was happening in my brain, what was happening. So I felt safe. I won't call it a bad trip. It wasn't a bad trip. It was very challenging. It was difficult. It was dark. So I'll explain parts of that. In that, this was my first experience doing this particular psychedelic, but I started seeing the motifs that you see. Like, I literally found myself in the middle of the tornado from The Wizard of Oz, right? Like, it was like this static and this circular dark that was just spinning me around, and saw things like floating by, right? I started to recognize, like, oh yeah, well, now that makes sense to me. Like, I get why that was, who wrote that, same thing with the, Alice in Wonderland falling down the rabbit hole, where you're just being surrounded by things floating, but it's dark, and you're like, the light at the top of the tunnel just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I was just falling and falling and falling. I was right on the edge. I was right on the edge of that ego death. I was right on the edge of just completely coming out of myself. And I do remember at one point, I was laying on a couch with my friend who had reached here. I'm right next to her, and she is holding my hand right next to me. But in my head, I am falling down this rabbit hole, and It was a grave. I was falling down and I was being covered by, by dirt. And I see the light at the top of the tunnel, and my friend's hand is giant hand reaching down and grabbing me. And she said, "I miss my old SYLECIA." And I was so disassociated and so numbed in my depression that I was like, I'm right here. I don't get it. Like, have I changed that much? Have I put on that much of a show? Like, I don't, kind of thing. And so having her being able to just like grab my hand and pull me up and out of this just darkness where I was numb and paralyzed, very much felt, empathy towards my mother who was paralyzed. And there were moments where I was being flung out, almost like a carnival ride, where I'm being spun and flung out and whipped back in. It was that kind of feeling. The MDMA brought me back into my body at a time where I really thought I was at the end of my ability to stay sane, or before falling off the edge. And so the MDMA pulled me back into my body, and being able to be with a group of people and in a container where we could feel safe and talk about the experience and mourn together and talk about, well, who is the old SYLECIA? Where did she go? Why am I different? Coming out of this journey where I really fully pulled away, I was disassociated from my body. At one point I was like floating up in the room looking down at myself, but also just felt so stuck and numb that I couldn't move, and I was just being surrounded by this storm that I was talking about. Very thankful that I got to be pulled out of that storm and then be able to talk through the experience with my friends. It wasn't a bad trip. It was hard. It was difficult, and I'm still integrating it to this day. Because it wasn't anything specific. You could go in and think, oh, well, I want to, connect with the universe or feel, connected to everyone in the earth. And this particular experience wasn't that for me. It was just showing me the storm and the place that I ended up putting myself in. And it just kind of opened up the door to the basement and said, you have stuff you haven't healed from. You need to dig deeper. You need to pull this out and start recognizing and putting the dots together of how to heal and how to move on and how to feel self-worth again. So the biggest thing that I took away from that experience is that it opened the door. It helped me recognize the programming that I had been running in the background. It wasn't like I suddenly had healed in that moment. It wasn't like I suddenly was able to walk through the door and be old SYLECIA again and happy again. But it made me start doing the work. I'm an empath. And I know a lot of people really, whenever they have an experience like this, are like, oh my gosh, I felt so much love and connected to the universe and all these things. And I feel like I've always had a bit of that, but this just like reignited it. And now I'm starting to, I'm able to like think of all of the ways that this can heal my family, my parents in particular. Honestly, now I'm just changing even my business plan and my path to include psychedelics. I'm going to all the conferences. I'm going to, I'm stepping into the business side of psychedelics as well, just to help continue spreading the message that people can. It's a tool to be used to heal. So the integration process that I've been going through since this journey has been a lot of journaling. I kind of had let go of journaling a long time ago and picked that back up again. I also sought some therapy, which I highly recommend. Go get therapy. Go get therapy. Go seek therapy. Go talk to people. Go talk to friends. And that was definitely something else as a part of my integration process, is I can talk about this healing process with my friends. Well, honestly, there's been so much media lately. I mean, the Netflix shows, even Fantastic Fungi and How to Change Your Mind, both of those were so helpful to me. Just educating yourself about what it is that you're going to experience and what's happening with your brain as you step into this. Normalize and break down the fear, right? And you can do that with so many of these videos and interviews and Netflix specials and reports. If you're more into the scientific side of things, like look at the MAPS reports. But the media that's out there is extremely helpful. So I would say that as a tool, just educate yourself and try to break down those fears of what you had been told.